All right, welcome back to Fundamentals of Philosophy. This is part 2 of Module 1 on the question of what is philosophy. In the previous lecture, we discussed the Beardsley's observation that our everyday, ordinary beliefs obscure an underlying network of deeper, more general, and more fundamental philosophical beliefs. We considered how that network of unexamined beliefs can become the structural foundation for our socio-political reality. And we saw how the Athens of Socrates and the Edwardian Britain of Bertrand Russell both represented empires that were held together by this sort of implicit conceptual scaffolding. Now, in this lecture, we're going to take a closer look at how Socrates and Russell challenged those foundational beliefs of their times by first examining Socrates' oracular mission, his dialectical method, and his epistemic humility, we'll call it, before then turning to Russell's defense of uncertainty and critique of the tyranny of custom. Empires can be paradoxically fragile things, and the foundational assumptions that hold them together are often tenuous and unstable. When a Socrates or a Russell emerges and manages to locate cracks in that foundation and begins to expose them publicly, an entire worldview can suddenly be put at risk. This can make philosophy dangerous work, especially when powerful people are profiting from keeping foundational social beliefs intact. And it certainly proved dangerous for Socrates, who seemed to be uniquely situated to challenge everything represented by sophistic philosophy in Athens. He was the son of a midwife and a stonemason, whose impoverished and ascetic lifestyle contrasted with the ostentatious wealth of the sophists. Unlike Socrates, the sophists were cosmopolitans, traveling educators who had relocated to Athens to earn a profit by teaching aristocrats to skillfully game the democratic system. Socrates, on the other hand, was a local boy who had become renowned as an Athenian war hero long before he became famous as a philosopher. Where the sophists charged hefty fees, Socrates charged nothing. He founded no schools and left behind no written works. The information that we have about his life and thought comes from the writings of his contemporaries, primarily through his student Plato. Now, according to Plato's account, Socrates' career as a public philosopher began with a riddle posed by the oracle of the god Apollo in the nearby city of Delphi. While Athens was nominally a democracy, the personal and political choices of the citizenry was strongly influenced by religion. In particular, the often obscure proclamations of the oracle were thought to represent the voice and the will of the god, Apollo in this case. Among the many Athenian citizens who consulted the oracle was Socrates' friend, Chaerephon, who asked the oracle whether there was anyone in Athens who was wiser than Socrates. And the oracle replied that no, there was in fact no one wiser than Socrates. Now the riddle is this: Socrates knew that he was not wise. He was aware. Athens teemed with experts from across the Mediterranean, experts, all of whom claimed to possess answers to any question that you might ask. Socrates, on the other hand, he didn't have answers for anything. All he had was questions. So if Socrates possessed no wisdom, and was aware of that, and yet no one in Athens was wiser than Socrates, we have an apparent contradiction here, right? What does this say about the nature of wisdom? And what does it say about the character of Athens? For Socrates, as for other Athenians, a proclamation from the oracle carried the weight of a divine command. And so he set himself to the task of solving this riddle. To accomplish this, Socrates decided that he would seek out the true nature of wisdom itself. And that is Plato's story, of sort of Socrates' origin story. And over the course of 35 dialogues, Plato fleshes this out. He depicts Socrates honing and developing his dialectical method, which he would use to investigate the oracle's riddle. This method, which has become known as the elenchus or the Socratic Method, is deceptively kind of simple, right? Socrates would seek out experts in Athens with a reputation for possessing the greatest wisdom. And he would then publicly interrogate these people, one by one, drawing from them the general and fundamental philosophical assumptions that stood beneath their stated beliefs. And again, note that this is the Beardsley's notions of general and fundamental philosophical beliefs versus ordinary beliefs. To be clear, Socrates came up with this first. So the Socratic dialogues represent a practical demonstration of the sort of critical examination that the Beardsleys are describing in their article. In each of the dialogues, Socrates constructs a skillful argument designed to guide his interlocutor, which means conversation partner, towards a deeper understanding of their own fundamental assumptions about the world. Typically, Socrates begins by asking his interlocutor to define some basic concept, such as courage or virtue. In turn, his interlocutor might respond by pointing to specific examples of virtuous or courageous acts, this or that courageous act or virtuous act. But that's not what Socrates is looking for here, right? He wants to uncover the general and the fundamental philosophical beliefs that provide the justifications for holding ordinary beliefs about particular cases. And it's not sufficient to simply point out that everybody knows that this or that is the case. Everyone that knows that this or that is an example of virtue. Socrates, that's not going to be good enough for him. He's going to demand that his conversation partner, his interlocutor, provide good arguments for their beliefs. So what makes for a good argument? Well, helpfully, the Beardsleys provide us with three essential criteria. First one is clarity. We must define the terms in our arguments with precision, and we must express them with great care and great attention to detail. And in this way, we reduce ambiguity. We eliminate vagueness, and we ward off potential misunderstandings of our reasoning. Second principle, reasonableness. Not enough to simply state what we believe. We have to provide good reasons for holding our beliefs. Socrates isn't so much interested in what his interlocutors believe. He's interested in why they believe it, right? What are their reasons? And a good argument should set out strong reasons for accepting that its conclusions are true. And it should be able to do so in the face of formidable objections and critical scrutiny, which Socrates provides in spades. And third, consistency. Our beliefs should hold together. They should support one another like sturdy threads within an interconnected web, a web of belief. If our beliefs do not support one another, if they clash against each other or contradict one another or cancel one another out, then the structural integrity of the entire network of beliefs is put at risk. The entire foundation. Socrates was really good at exposing internal contradictions. So what was the result of Socrates' investigations? Well, he discovered that the wisdom of Athens' vaunted poets and philosophers and craftsmen and politicians was in fact constructed upon a foundation of confusion and ambiguity. When challenged, these experts were unable to provide reasonable arguments that supported their claims. The conceptual scaffolding holding their worldview together was shot through with fatal contradictions. What Socrates realized, but the experts crucially failed to realize, was that they in fact possessed no genuine knowledge at all. They thought that they had knowledge, but they were wrong. And it was that was here, where Socrates finally figured out the solution to the oracle's riddle. Socrates' wisdom lay in his awareness of his own ignorance. That's the thing he knew that they didn't. They didn't know they were ignorant, and he knew it. And it's only by acknowledging what we do not know that we can begin the process of seeking true knowledge. Seeking knowledge begins in with the acknowledgement of our own ignorance. This is a principle that's known as epistemic humility, or a sense of intellectual modesty regarding the limitations of our own knowledge. Maintaining epistemic humility in the face of profound questions has become a foundation of the Western philosophical tradition and a hallmark of Socrates' enduring legacy. Like Socrates, Bertrand Russell, his philosophical project begins with a sense of profound wonder in the face of momentous cosmic uncertainties. For Russell, philosophy begins where science ends, at the very horizon of the human capacity for comprehending the universe. From a cosmological perspective, pull the lens back. Humans are a very young species. We haven't been around for a long time. An alien anthropologist who's teaching a class on the history of Earth is primarily going to be telling a story to the class about a dinosaur planet, because that's most of Earth's history. Humans are maybe going to show up like as a brief footnote somewhere in the last lecture, somewhere late in the lecture, but we're not the stars of the show. And yet, in that very brief span of time, we've discovered science, from Newtonian physics to quantum mechanics. We've developed psychology, which many of you are taking as a degree path. We've decoded the mathematical language of nature itself, seemingly, at least to some extent. It's not bad for a pretty brief run. And every one of these fields, science, mathematics, psychology, began as a question within philosophy. It was only when reliable methods for delivering consistent results had been developed that science, mathematics, and psychology broke off into independent disciplines. Initially, science was just natural philosophy. All of these things started out just as a part of philosophy. But by the time of Russell's Britain, the ground had kind of shifted a bit. The sciences that philosophy had given birth to had in turn given birth to world-changing technologies. Where Socrates' Athens was dominated by the empty rhetoric of sophistical politicians, the Britain of Russell, not that it wasn't dominated by that, but it was primarily defined by the hegemony of instrumental reason. That's what drove the machine. The only value that was recognized by practical men, by the grown-ups in the room, was material value. The only questions worth asking were questions with definite answers that could be transformed into practical results. What work can it do? But where administrative bureaucrats saw the efficient machinery of empire, Russell saw a prison, the mind and the soul. The man who has no tincture of philosophy, Russell writes, goes through life imprisoned in the prejudices derived from common sense. I love that no tincture of philosophy line, that's great. The common sense of Edwardian Britain was the efficient management of a colonial empire, and Russell spent his life exposing the contradictions at the heart of that worldview. Now, unlike Socrates, who attacked the wealthy Athenian aristocracy from outside of its class structure, Russell was an enemy from within. He was the grandson of a prime minister and the heir to a wealthy and influential family of Welsh aristocrats, though he was orphaned at a young age. And from his position at the prestigious Cambridge University, one of the top universities in Britain, where he was one of the top philosophers, if not the top philosopher, or top academic in general. And from there, Russell produced just an extraordinary volume of influential work that continues to shape the modern fields of mathematics, logic, linguistics, and philosophy. He wasn't some kind of outsider throwing stones from the margin, like Socrates kind of was toward the end. When Russell spoke, people listened. He was a grown-up in the room. He was a professional person. Russell's The Value of Philosophy, the article that we read for this module, like Plato's Apology, represents a devastating critique presented in the form of an ironic defense. Socrates is not defending himself in the Apology. He is putting the whole of Athenian society on trial. And in our anthology, the Apology is called The Defense of Socrates. It's usually called the Apology, so I'm going to call it that. So Socrates is not really defending himself. He's putting Athens on trial. And he believes he has been set upon his own city by the oracle as what he calls a stinging gadfly, to stir Athens from its dream of unearned certainty. And while Socrates is quite literally defending his life in this case, Russell's pretext is that he is defending philosophy against charges of impracticality. But this is just one move in a larger argument. It's always arguments within arguments within arguments. Science, Russell tells us, provides us with a list of settled answers. But, by definition, a world with no questions, that has only answers and no questions, can make no progress. Can't go anywhere with that. All possibilities for a better future exist beyond the horizon of the fixed and the final, of the settled and the certain. Russell was not an enemy of material progress per se, but he was deeply skeptical of any philosophy that reduced all value to material value. The technologies of progress require good minds to guide them. That's the thing. And it is only by challenging our understanding of the world, by transcending the common sense of practical men of our time and place, that we may escape what Russell calls the tyranny of custom and take genuine control of our destinies. So from Russell's perspective, the questions of philosophy aren't means to an end, right? They aren't some algorithm designed to generate an agreed upon list of settled certainties, a list of facts. They're valuable in themselves, not as ends, but in themselves, because they force us to reckon with the uncertain and the unsettled. In philosophy, uncertainty isn't a bug, it's a feature. The world itself is filled with ambiguity and uncertainty. And making sound practical decisions in such a world requires developing a mind skilled in navigating ambiguity. And that's what Russell is trying to teach us to do. The questions of philosophy are both unsettled and unsettling. They force us to expand our thoughts beyond what passes for conventional wisdom in our local corner of the universe. We must expand to confront the universal by testing our minds against questions that may literally lie outside the capacity of human reasoning. The questions of philosophy are the stones against which we sharpen our critical reasoning skills. And with sharpened tools, we return to the mundane and the practical, ready to set about the business of transforming the world with greater skill, with more critical reasoning, and with greater logical consistency. The implicit philosophical dogmas of our time now don't exactly map onto those of classical Athens or Edwardian Britain. But Socrates and Russell's critiques still cut uncomfortably close, even today. Because of their efforts and those of the Beardsleys and others, we now possess more and better tools for identifying the ways in which contradictory reasoning can lead us astray, either intentionally or unintentionally. And in our final lecture in this particular series for Module 1, we'll look at the responses from the authorities whose dogmas Socrates and Russell were challenging. Call it the Empire's Strike Back. And we'll consider whether Socrates and Russell can themselves escape from the critiques they wield against their respective societies. And I'll see you there.